And welcome back to episode 2 of showing some of my game collection. The first one was of my Sega games. This one is of my Nintendo games. Next will be Microsoft, so Xbox in other words. With that said, let's get to gear. I would have used Nintendo music, but I'm afraid of them actually doing a copyright strike against me. So I'll be playing Gravity Rush music in the background, and I'll look for any opportunity to just play music, but I figured it was only right to wear my Zelda hat for this. Now, first up, we'll be doing Super Nintendo stuff for the most part. First up, we have a really good beat 'em up game that was exclusive, like Streets of Rage was an exclusive to, of course, Sega. This would be their version along with Capcom Final Fight, which, of course, you see Mike Hagar on the front right there. So yeah, it's only right. And next we have, sadly not the best condition, but it's a beat 'em up type game, Spider-Man obviously. I still need to get Maximum Carnage because it's like the only one of only 2 red cartridges for Super Nintendo. Next up we have called Mighty Morphin Power Rangers The Fighting Edition, which is actually a full-fledged fighting game. You have total 4 villains you can play as, and 4 good guys. 4 Zords, I should be more precise. The Megazord, the Thunder Megazord, the Ninja Megazord, and the Shogun Megazord. Some creature I don't remember, actually there are 2 creatures, I don't remember what episodes they were from, just random creatures they chose. Then you have Goldar, and of course you have as the big baddie boss, Lord Zed, obviously. Next we have Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which is in really good condition compared to, unfortunately, my Super Street Fighter 2. My Sega Genesis version is actually in way better condition than this. And I get the next batch. Next up, we have a game that a lot of people consider a joke for the most part, and that is really what you call is RPGs for dummies, I guess you could say is what they said about it. This is, of course, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which is actually a pretty cheap game if you want to get like a super cheap RPG for your Super Nintendo. It's probably one of the cheapest for good reason. It is considered a joke, though it's still got a special spot for me because it was one of the very first RPGs I ever played. Though once I tried games like Final Fantasy III, aka Final Fantasy VI, yeah, needless to say, never went back after that. That is easily, in my opinion, probably in the top 3 best Final Fantasy games of all time. Next we have, figure I'll get this over with. We have Super Star Wars, of course being A New Hope, obviously. Then we have, obviously, another Star Wars game. This is Super Star Wars, or rather Super Empire Strikes Back. And of course, you guessed it, Super Return of the Jedi. I had to obviously get a hold of the entire trilogy of all 3 games, which are actually very hard platformers, I will say. Next up is arguably one of the best games of this era, and that is Final Fantasy II, aka you probably knew better by Final Fantasy IV. But this is definitely one of the best games in the franchise, hands down, and if you ever get a chance for a reasonable price to get this, pick it up. And while you're picking it up, make sure you pick up Final Fantasy III, aka Final Fantasy VI, which I arguably have to say, hands down, is probably, in my opinion, the best RPG on the Super Nintendo, easily. Okay, number 1 in my opinion. There is another game that's probably number 2 on my list for Super Nintendo, but we'll get to that. And next we have, in my opinion, the best platformer on the Super Nintendo, the original Mega Man X. This game holds a really special place for me. This was the Mega Man game that actually got me into the Mega Man franchise as a whole. And because of this game, it's probably why still to this day, Mega Man X is probably my favorite series of Mega Man games. I prefer it easily over the original Mega Man series, though I still like it. I still like the X series better. I think the music is way better. The 16-bit guitar is awesome. And I just love and always be a fan of the main villain of the series, Sigma. He's way more interesting and a little bit more of a complex character than, say, Dr. Wily, let's be honest. Okay, and here's the list of the normal Super Nintendo batch of games. We have, of course, Super Mario All-Stars, which is basically a collection of the original 3 Mario games on the Super Nintendo. I mean, not Super Nintendo, but original Nintendo NES. And this was actually a good price range to get. I mean, you could still get this today, probably around $20, $25, which isn't bad, given you're getting 3 solid overall games. And in my opinion, this is the best way to play it. At least if you want to play on an authentic console, better playing it on the Super Nintendo than playing it on the original Nintendo. Next up, we have what many people would be the crowning jewel of the Super Nintendo, and maybe many people's opinion, probably one of easily the best platformers of all time. Is it really a good platformer? Yes. But for me, personally, I probably rank this number 2 or number 3 platformer, at least for me personally, Super Nintendo. Number 1, as I said, is Mega Man X. This is probably number 2 or number 3. It kind of goes back and forth with another platformer in that slot, which is actually a game I still need to recollect. And that is the original Donkey Kong Country. Made by Rare, of course. Next, we have the original Star Fox, a truly good classic. And it was really the first 3D game, and about the only 3D game that was, of course, released on the Super Nintendo, thanks to a special FX chip. Next, we have a pretty fun boxing game, which I still easily am probably my top 10 favorite Super Nintendo games of all time, Super Punch-Out. Of course, in my opinion, probably my number 2 favorite game in the Zelda franchise, and that is The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. Easily, in my opinion, one of the best. And of course, we can't forget about the only black cartridge that was released on the Super Nintendo, and what would be the beginning of one of my personal favorite fighting game series of all time, Killer Instinct. And of course, on the cover there, Fogor, which is one awesome looking cyborg. Now, with that said, we'll get to now some of the Super Nintendo's, or N64 stuff. Okay, first batch. We have first, yes, a Madden game. Madden 2000 to be more precise. Yeah, the Madden series, nothing special, but still, I actually liked playing Madden on the N64, though I'm not the biggest football fan. Next, we have arguably one of, in my opinion, maybe my number 2 favorite wrestling game of all time, and that is WCW NWO Revenge, with, of course, Hollywood Hogan, Kevin Nash, Raven, and, of course, Bill Goldberg on the cover. Really fun game from THQ, which unfortunately no longer exists. Next, we have, in my opinion, probably the best wrestling game of all time, WWF No Mercy, which you can play with many greats, like you can play in the game with characters like, obviously, Eddie Guerrero, of course, Life from Existence, Chris Benoit, and many other characters. And of course, obviously, The Rock, Stone Cold, Triple H, and others. Of course, in my opinion, the best of the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series, Tony Hawk 2 Pro Skater. Though, I dare say, I prefer the Tony Hawk 2X, which was exclusively on the original Xbox. was, in my opinion, the superior version. Next, we have technically a dumbed down, but still a really fun game. If you're looking for a decent strategy type game on the Nintendo 64, you're probably not going to find anything, probably, in all honesty, better than Command and Conquer. Though it's not as good as, obviously, what the PC version is going to be, but still, it's not bad, honestly. Of course, regarded as the best video game based on a movie of all time, and also really the game that introduced people to a split screen multiplayer up to like 4-person player shooter. This is really what popularized shooting games on home console. Really, GoldenEye was the one who really started it, and then Halo carried it much farther. But this is the game that really started, I think, the whole craze of FPS games on console. The last from this batch is, of course, Star Fox 64, which, in my opinion, is one of the best on-rail shooter-type games of all time, and is arguably, in my opinion, one of the best 64 games of all time. And you can't get rid of that funny meme, do a barrel roll. I think that's pretty funny. Now here's the next batch. First, we'll do a couple of technically not very good fighters, or one particular one, War Gods, which was actually made by the same creators of Mortal Kombat. Midway and other creators were involved in the creation of War Gods. Also, speaking of Midway, Mortal Kombat 4, and yeah, I have like every port of that game now. Of course, we have KI Gold, or Killer Instinct Gold, and of course we see Gargos on the front. Retro now Gargos. And yeah, technically it is, I guess, Killer Instinct 2, but at least you can play it in more or less 3D. It's about the closest you're gonna get to the arcade version, at least old gen. It's definitely better than the Super Nintendo game. Next we have arguably one of the best Star Wars games of all time, and that is Star Wars Rogue Squadron, which is definitely a really good shooter. I actually dare say, I think this is more fun than Star Fox 64, and that's saying something. Next we have, in my opinion, one of the best things also come out of Star Wars Episode 1, and that is Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, where you get to do pod racing. I actually think it's a really fun overall game. I still need to get the sequel, which I think you can pretty much only get on the Dreamcast. But this is definitely a fun game, honestly. If you're looking for a good classic racer on older gen, I recommend it. Next we have an underrated jewel from the N64 era, and that is Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, which is, of course, Legends, not canon. Next, in my opinion, probably one of the top 3 best Pokemon games of all time, and that is Pokemon Stadium. And last of this batch is the Collector's Edition, of course, Gold, as you see, version of Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, which many people consider to be the best Legend of Zelda game of all time. And I understand why many people would have this at number 1. For me, it's probably my number 3 favorite Zelda game. But we may talk about that later on sometime in the future on rankings of the Zelda series. In my opinion, anyways. Okay, next, show you a couple that actually still have the original boxes of. I do have a second copy of course, Street Fighter 2 Turbo in box, and make sure it stays protected. Next we have, in my opinion, one of the best FPS games, and a sole predecessor, or whatever, if you will, to GoldenEye, and that is Perfect Dark from Rare. And of course the beginning of the Smash series, the original Super Smash Bros. And this game is not easy to find in box, at least for a reasonable price, that is, because of its popularity. Makes it harder to collect. Quickly, before I go on, thought I'd quickly show a course part I consider with the collection. The NES Classic, and the SNES Classic. Next up, we're going to be looking at a couple, I don't have too many, but a couple of DS and 3DS games. First, a couple of actually specific Game Boy Advance. I couldn't find all my handheld games, unfortunately, but here's some I did find. And that is, in my opinion, the best version. If you're going to play Pokemon Red, your best bet is just to get the Game Boy Advance version, which is improved overall graphics, better color, of course, and many things superior to the original version. That is, Pokemon Fire Red version, Game Boy Advance, and also another one of my personal favorites, Pokemon Emerald version, which I actually like this game quite a bit, in all honesty. It's quite fun. A couple with inbox I still have. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Ring of Fates, which is actually a really fun Final Fantasy game in all honesty. It's pretty solid. If you get a chance, actually check it out. It's a really good one if you're looking to collect for the DS or 3DS, since it plays backwards compatible. Another, I think, highly underrated Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy Explorers, which is actually a very solid Final Fantasy game. It's a little bit more unique, which is hard in recent years to find a. We also have Super Street Fighter 4 3D Edition, of course. Here's a couple more without cases. We have a really great game, Okami, which is a really good one. Hopefully eventually I can upload the PS4 version. Of course, we have Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days. Another Square game, The World Ends With You, which is actually a very underrated, and it's actually now, of course, going to get an updated version for the Switch, which I think they're calling it Final Mix, whatever. We also have the DS port of Chrono Trigger, which is the cheaper route to go if you want to play Chrono Trigger on something. Honestly, I highly recommend this one. It is definitely a good way to play because it's loyal 100% to the original Super Nintendo if you're not willing to pay what the Super Nintendo version costs, which is kind of crazy if you don't have a good eye and patience for keeping a close lookout. The last couple we have here are Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, the original version, and Pokemon Y, which is actually quite a bit of fun. Honestly, I like it. Of the more recent games in the series, I didn't care much for Pokemon White and Black or White and Black 2. I haven't played, though, the most recent one, Sun and Moon, so I can't say on that. But for me, Y is my favorite, at least of more recent era. Okay, here's a couple of others special ones. These are a bit more rare to find, to collect. And we have Turtles in Time, which is a little bit harder to find and can be pricey if you're not good at retro game collecting. Same thing can be said also about Super Metroid, as well. Is starting to become a little bit more rare and the price is starting to go up. If you aren't good at spotting deals or occasionally go to flea markets or something, that's probably your best bet to find a reasonable deal, in all honesty. Because if you go online, on average, you're looking at probably $60 for this. And the Ninja Turtles in Time can run, like, on average, probably $50 to $70. So yeah, it's getting kind of pricey for some of these games. And in my opinion, at least for me personally, the crowning jewel in this collection is Chrono Trigger, the original Super Nintendo version. Now, I got this for a pretty good deal because I was very patient looking for off and on in my area. Kept close eye on local sales, yard sales, garage sales, stuff like that. Occasionally, out in the wild, you might luck out and get one for a good price. That's your best bet, because if you want to buy one of these off of eBay on average or Amazon, you're looking at probably around $150, and that's bonkers in my opinion. If you're willing to pay that much money without really having some sense, well, I can't say much more than that. Yeah. We'll get ready to finish up with some Wii and GameCube for last. I'll save GameCube for very last. But we have here, and somewhat underrated, pretty good platformer in all honesty. I like the artistic style, and that is Epic Mickey from Disney. I'm actually surprised, and you can get this under $10 easily. It's a good price, and a pretty good, solid platformer. Next, we have another good platformer. We have, of course, new Super Mario Bros. Wii, which is a pretty good platformer, a good Mario game in all honesty. We have next a game that a lot of people tend to bash, I've noticed. Haven't had a chance yet to play, but we'll see eventually when I get a chance. But it's a good price. Metroid Other M. Next we have quite highly praised game, and that is, of course, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Next, Super Smash Bros. Brawl, which is definitely very well liked by quite a few people. It's definitely highly regarded in the Smash series. Next we have one of the few games factory sealed still, one of the more unique of the Capcom crossover fighting game series. Last of the Wii is Legend of Zelda The Twilight Princess. Now personally I prefer a GameCube version of this. I don't like the whole stupid motion control thing gimmick for this, in all honesty. Not a big fan. That's probably why it's so much cheaper versus the GameCube version. Speaking of, next we're going to look at some of the games I have. Here's the last batch. Of course, we have arguably one of the best Star Wars games of all time. One of probably the more fun games for me personally. And this was a launch title for the GameCube. Star Wars Rogue Leader, Rogue Squadron 2. Arguably a lot of people's favorite version of Soul Calibur 2. Reason? Because you could play as Link, obviously. And even though personally, out of the three exclusives, I kind of prefer overall Spawn, but Link is pretty fun to play as, I will admit to that. And I love the fact he got his music, and it. We have here, in my opinion, the best version to play of Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Is the GameCube version by far. I much prefer the control scheme and overall design of the GameCube control over the Wii sensor remote controls. I'm just not the biggest fan of the Wii motion gimmick thing. Never have been the biggest fan. That's why most of the Wii games I own are ones that are compatible with GameCube controllers. Or the regular, like, Wii Plus or whatever controller. As long as it can use a regular controller, I'm fine. Next we have, which a lot of people highly praise, and that is Metroid Prime, which is definitely pretty highly regarded by many players, first-person shooter or Nintendo fan alike. Definitely one of the better, at least in quality overall. We have this often overlooked Final Fantasy game, and another one, the Crystal Chronicles series, which is an interesting one, to say the least. And not very expensive either, believe it or not. Next we have Pokemon Colosseum, which is an interesting game, to say the least. It's actually quite fun. In my opinion, it's one of the more unique games in the Pokemon series. And probably one of my top, maybe 5 favorite Pokemon games. Then after that, we have the sequel, which is often overlooked, and is starting to become somewhat rare, surprisingly. And of course, Pokemon XD with Evil Lugia on the front, which is pretty cool. Okay, next we have, which is a great collector set. If you get the chance to pick this up for a reasonable price, get it. This is 4 Zelda games. This is The Legend of Zelda, The Legend of Zelda 2, or rather just Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. You also get The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. So definitely some very good Zelda games right there in one set. Hard to believe all of that on just like one mini disc. It's hard to believe. And here's last, but not least, somewhat sadly overlooked, though out of the Zelda series, it's, I think, aged the best, and this is, in my opinion, the #1 best Legend of Zelda game of all time. That's right. In my opinion, #3 is pretty much a tie for me, but in my opinion, this is the best Zelda game of all time, and that is The Wind Waker. I love the art style, the cell shading. I've always been a big fan of that art style, the cell shade art style. Obviously, it's why I'm a fan of games like Jet Grind Radio, Jet Set Radio Future, games such as also Sunset Overdrive, and many others. And that's probably one of the reasons why this is my favorite. And I think because of that art style, it made it age way better than other games in the Zelda franchise as a whole. And I love the fact that you get to explore the islands and stuff. It just adds a little bit more to the experience overall, in all honesty. And the music is also really good, in my opinion. But with that said, these are, for me, my Nintendo collection, at least for the most part. And my next, of course, game collection series will be for Microsoft and Xbox. As I said, PlayStation will be 2 separate videos because of how big my PlayStation collection is. Since I've been working on it since probably around 97, if that says how long I've been collecting. With that said, I'll get ready to cut this video. See you all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel. Tell me below, what are some of your personal favorite Nintendo games? Which Nintendo console is your personal favorite to collect for?